I am pleased that you're here so we can share some information. Can everybody hear me? You good in the back? Dan, can you hear me? Okay. So talk about our middle school work. What I want to accomplish tonight is to give you the why and the how of the work thus far. I want a timeline of the work moving forward, and then we'll leave certainly enough time for questions and answers. We have it allotted for about an hour and a half. I'll talk about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay? All right. I want to start with this slide because of the questions that have been out on email, Facebook, other social media sites, and the like. These seem to be those that are kind of driving most of the conversation. So I've started here to say that by the time that you leave tonight, we want to make sure that you have these questions answered. And if not, then we'll certainly make sure that we can do it. I want to start with the first question right now, though, and that is, are we cutting the arts or facts or PE? The answer to that is unequivocally no, we are not. I'll get into more of that later about some of the discussions we're having, but for 17, 18, 18, 19, we are not cutting the arts. What will change for 17, 18, that's going to be the very next two slides, so you'll know exactly what changes we're making for our middle school going forward. Then I want to go into why are we studying middle schools in the first place? Why are we even having this conversation? And that's an important component to this because of, I think, some of the needs that we have in our district, and honestly, some of the opportunities that we have to improve rigor and relevance for our middle school students. Some of the vernacular that we've been using are these things that are called EDLs and PLEs, and so I want to give you a definition and an understanding of what those are and what they look like. And then we'll talk about length of instruction has also been a part of the conversation, and we'll make sure that we do that as well, and then tell you exactly what will change for the 18-19 school year so that you're informed about that. And quite honestly, that'll be the easiest question of the evening for me to answer. And then what is the process and the timeline of the study moving forward? Okay? So let's talk about changes for next year. The first one that I want to talk about, in my opinion, is the most important. And I understand that you may have come tonight having another question about performing arts. But I'd really like to make the case that this conversation and about why we are having this discussion in our district about middle schools is about instruction. It's about the rigor of it and the relevance of it. And it's important for us to have this conversation, and it gets to be a little personal, particularly if you work in the Blue Valley School District and you've been providing that. And for a new superintendent to come in and say, we need to discuss rigor and relevance, I understand how that feels. I also know that it's an important conversation for us to have because we really haven't had a substantial conversation about instruction for about 15 years for our middle schools. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what we're working on today, and if you are in a middle school today with a child, they are working on and experiencing more authentic, real applications of their learning. I mean, we're in a building that was built with that particular concept. And one of the things that we are doing as a part of enriching the experience for middle school students is to make sure that our students are learning things that are relevant to them, that they can make sense of, and that have a greater impact on them. And part of that is the authenticity of it. So you'll hear us talk a little bit in a minute about the rigor and relevance framework, which is a basis of the work that we're doing and the conversations that we're having, as well as talking about the opportunities for us to have problem and project and authentic work experiences. I want you to know that we're not accepting any one particular plan, if you will. We're not taking an initiative from another school. We've done a good amount of visiting of schools, research about this, and we're putting, if you will, our Blue Valley opportunity into this. Okay, so there's still a lot of discussion that we're continuing to have and that we will continue to have as we go forward this and continue to create these future-ready and student-centered opportunities. A year ago, we sent out, about this time, I think it was a little bit earlier than this, we sent out a survey to 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade parents, students, and teachers. And from that, and those questions that were asked, these changes were recommended and made for next year. So anything that is talked about here this evening under the next two slides, this slide and the next one, are the only things that are changing for next year. Music will be daily. 81% of the parents told us in that survey that they wanted music daily. So daily music will happen next year. By choice was also the issue. And here's what I'm going to talk about in a little bit is the opportunity for us to have more student and parent choice in curricular options that you're taking. And I think that when we get into the question and answers, we're going to talk about the way that we have historically done it in terms of a forced wheel versus one that is truly elective in terms of providing students and parents with that choice. I want you to know that we've taken nothing away from that in terms of your ability to pick and choose, but we have taken that forced nature because part of the conversations that we heard through that survey was we would like to take other things other than being in music and forced to take that. However, there are other people that certainly want it and need it, and that option is not only there, but a requirement for you to be able to do that throughout the middle school years is certainly going to be maintained. Addition of Chinese, we had a world language immersion program that was approved by our Board of Education in December, and part of that was to take the Blue Valley Southwest feeder for Chinese immersion. And so Aubrey Bend Middle School will have Chinese as an option for all grade levels. And the note there about it coming to you soon is the fact that that plan that was approved for world language immersion will now come to other feeders in subsequent years. And so there will be additional foreign language, world language opportunities for middle school students as that plan unfolds. The wheel, as I mentioned, is no longer forced, it's elective. So you and your student get to choose. However, the other thing that we asked in the survey was the exposure to the length of time that students were in courses. Currently, the wheel is 7 weeks. We've moved it to 9 because what we heard from students and parents is they wanted longer time in those elective choices. And so it's gone from, if you will, 7 weeks to 9 weeks now in those areas. World language also moved from a semester to a year long. The World Language Committee that worked on that immersion program with us asked us to consider that, and we said yes. So world language will be, if you will, doubled in the 7th grade area. We've also expanded elective offerings. Next year we'll have coding, robotics. Farm to Table is essentially taking family and consumer science and taking a look at from the planting and harvesting of food all the way through the process and manufacturing process, all the way to either finding it on your table or at a restaurant. And we're finding some pretty cool opportunities within that with our teachers in terms of developing that curriculum, and then modern communications as well. So those are the things that will change for next year, and again, they're based on conversations that we've been having both in the district, but also from our survey results from a year ago. Let me say that tonight at that back table, you'll see some business cards that we've made up. I'd like for you to take one. We've reopened that survey. So after you hear tonight, we'd like for you to again take the survey so again we can have your information going forward. So why study this in the first place? Our tagline is education beyond expectations. And to truly fulfill that, it requires us to continually take a look at the offerings that we have in our school district, but also the rigorousness, if you will, of our instruction and the relevance to which we're applying that for students, again, in real world and very authentic ways. It's also been 15 years since we've had this discussion. 2001 was the last major change to the middle school schedule. And quite honestly, it's time for us to have that conversation. If you just think about all the things that have happened over the past 15 years, either in our community, in our state, in our nation, our world, there's a lot of impacts that are occurring, and are they reflective in the curriculum, the instruction, the schedule, and those sorts of things that we have for our children? So a part of that is why. This is real busy, but I think it's extremely important for us to talk about this. So the students that are currently in our schools, basically from age 3 to 18, which covers essentially all of our students K through 12, are the Generation Z, okay? And what you see in front of you are characteristics about Generation Z students. And we've used this information as we've had these conversations within our school district to say, with a new generation of students, and having been 15 years since we looked at our schedule and some of our curricular offerings, are we best meeting the needs of our kids? And the answer to that is not no, but we can do better. And I want to point out a couple of things. The first is, if you see the one at the top center that says mobility, baby boomers, like myself, think of mobility as a student or a family moving from one place to the next. Mobility for our kids is going to not only be where they live, but the multiple careers that they will have, and as estimated here, as much as 17 jobs. How do we prepare students for that amount of mobility? I mean, if that was happening to me, I would almost consider it to be a little bit of chaos. But that's going to be the world. And that's going to be the demands on our kids as they move forward. How are we best preparing them for those opportunities, both today while they're in our middle schools, but certainly once they leave us? If you look at the effective management right there in the middle, the left side of that, the green says baby boomer. And looking out in the crowd, I would say that there's a good portion of us that are here. And quite honestly, those were the same people that created the schedule in 2001 for kids. Today, our kids are much more visual. They like to try and see things. Failure is really not fatal to them. They see it as a process of learning, just something that they automatically do. Okay? The gamification that's going on in our world is built upon that. There's various levels. They systematically apply it so that you will fail, but so that you can again try it again. So it's built into our kids' schema in terms of that. We like command and control, hierarchical systems and that sort of thing. These kids collaborate. I want you to think about, if you have a middle school student or even a high school student, think about the realm of influence and the friends that they have. Some of those are not just geographical. They are broad-based in terms of how they're interacting with people, and the collaborations that they have are not set. They are, if you will, periodic. They are episodic, and they free flow back and forth from either a sport or an activity into another part of their life. How are we, again, making sure that we can maximize those opportunities for our kids in our instruction, our curriculum, our schedule that are represented in our middle schools? Along the bottom of that, you'll see a timeline. Most of our students that are currently in our middle schools, maybe some 2002 births, mostly 3, 4, and 5s. Just take a look at what has happened since that time to today. And again, these are major elements that have influenced our world, the way that we look at things, the way that we access information. The question is has that come into the scope of our work in our middle schools? And if you go back to all the way to 2001, it gets even broader. This might be information that, as identified as teenager a little ahead of our middle school kids, but I think it's pertinent for us to talk about. And I'd really like to talk about two of them. What that talks about is that there was a CDC survey done. 27% of students felt that they were so sad every day for 2 weeks or more that they stopped their regular activities. Folks, the social and emotional learning and the impact that stress is having on our kids is palatable. It's affecting them a lot. And particularly in a school district that has such high expectations as ours, that's something that we need to attend to. I'm not here to make this more dramatic than it should be, but I want to give you two statistics. This year alone, we have had more suicide protocols filled out for middle school age students than we ever have before. This year alone, we've had more students that have been suspended from school for the possession, the use, and the sale of illegal drugs. It's here. It's impacting them. How are we going to have that conversation about what it looks like in terms of instruction and curriculum and schedule and opportunities that we provide to students? That is a necessary conversation for us. I said to the group on Monday night, there's not too many things that keep me up at night. Sleep pretty well, except for the fact that how are we going to tackle the impacts that are coming upon our kids? And what role do we play in both solving it, but also in the production of it? I think you all know what this app is, right? It is Uber. Uber is the largest transportation company in the world, yet it owns no vehicles. This is the largest content holder and company in the world, yet it owns no content. And this one, the largest accommodation company in the world, yet it owns not a single hotel room. My point? Today, it's not about what we possess. It's about access. It's about the access to information, to knowledge, and what our students do with it. You see, our schema has been that we collect things, right? I mean, all of these storage units that are being built out here, they're not being built they're being built for people that contain stuff, and that we do that a lot. This generation of students, it's about access. It's about lean and about how they can access the information, but then how they can use it in their life. Our curriculum, our instruction, our ability to have an agile system, a schedule that works, has to reflect that. I want you to consider this. It's the question we ask ourselves. I think we would probably want the most advanced, current, to-date operational techniques. We'd want them to be verified, but I'm not sure that we would want to continue to use some things that were at least 15 years old. When it's this serious and it's this important, that's also a part of our work as well. The last part of the why we would be having this conversation is that the world has changed relative to education, with No Child Left Behind no longer being the federal legislation. And what is key and important about that is that No Child Left Behind drove every school district and every student in schools to take several, more than enough, standardized tests. Our curriculum and our instruction began to be more test-driven than ever before. I also want to tell you that the Blue Valley School District won that race. There is not a school district over the time period of No Child Left Behind that did that era of achievement any better than the Blue Valley School District. That's important, and that's significant. But equally significant is the understanding that now we are with Every Student Succeeds Act, and it does not carry the same weight of student achievement scores. It is more about the output than the input. And really it gives a lot of deference and responsibility to the state. And I think we're in a wonderful position to have Dr. Randy Watson as the Commissioner of Education in the state. Matter of fact, he's going to be here and work with our staff at the end of this month. And it's really about this plan and the opportunities that we have in this school district to maximize the ability of our students for not necessarily the test taking, which is important, but more so the opportunities that they have when they leave us. How well prepared are they to enter into a world where they will have multiple careers and maybe 10 or more jobs? What's their ability to be able to be agile and pivot and collaborate and do it in new and different ways? Today, their worth is value of what they add, not necessarily what they have done in terms of just an achievement score. It's more than that. And we've got the opportunity, I think, in this conversation to embrace that in a much more robust way. Our goal in our work is to make sure that we have student-centered learning experiences that ready them for the future. And the student-centered piece is part of that Gen Z characteristic, part of that social and emotional learning piece that I talked about earlier. The future ready is to ready them for the rigors that they will have in college and in their technical pursuits, but also an importance for them to be able to have the ability to be agile in their life, to be able to move and be, if you will, achieve that mobility that it appears based upon those predictive analytics that they will use. We've been in this discussion for a while, but it hasn't just been contained in our school district. We've been including other partners into it. This first school district is Poway in San Diego, California, and we're a part of a consortium with them. It's called the Western States Benchmarking Consortium. They, along with several other school districts, for a number of years, Blue Valley has been benchmarking our success with this particular group. Design 39 is a middle school in that school district. And the reason why it's called Design 39 is because it's the 39th iteration of the plan. And the reason why I want you to have that as a part of this conversation is that where we are right now, yes, we are still very much in the process of discussing. We haven't approved anything for the 18-19 school year or beyond. We're still having the discussions. But this is taking us from ideation about what can we create to iteration about what is appropriate. And April 10th, when we had that conversation with the board and we presented that proposal, that was part of iteration. We're now back in ideation again because, as you're going to see here in a second, that plan did not meet all of our design principles. But that's part of the process that we're going to be going through in order to make sure that we can maximize the benefits and the opportunities that we have for our middle school students. Vita Middle School and Vista Schools just north of LA is a part of that conversation as well. Taylor County, Kentucky. Gwinnett County is right outside of Atlanta. Another school district that we're utilizing, Westside Middle School as well. We're creating a link on our website where we're going to drop in all of our research and presentations so that you'll have an opportunity to see all of that. You're also going to see a summation of the achievement scores and some of the work that these folks are doing that tie to some of our conversations. So you'll understand why we went to Westside, for example. They're doing some unique things to reach the social and emotional learning of kids. They also have a pretty creative schedule. And so we've looked at that to see, is there any modification that we can have? The others also have their unique abilities in order to impact this work as well. So here's what we've learned. As I mentioned earlier, student choice and voice is critically important to this conversation. I think it's critically important as well so that students have a sense of themselves and part of that self-actualization and self-management regarding some of our social and emotional needs that they have. It also needs to be more personalized. And that personalization of learning is not something new to Blue Valley. It has been with us for a number of years. Again, we're having conversations about things of standards that we've had in our district for a very long time, and what is the new definition of that? Is there a new definition that is required? And I think after 15 years, it's time for us to, again, have that conversation. Time for students to create every day is important. You've heard of makerspace. Some of our middle schools and elementaries are a part of that, if you will, that movement. That's not just a fad. That is meeting the needs and the characteristics of students that have to spend time with their hands and their minds in creating things. And it's part of that fail forward possibility as well, is that everything that we create is not going to be successful, but it's in the act of doing and trying and error that we actually have new ways of learning. Getting out of students' way, essentially what that means is that it's important for us to understand what are the passions of kids and how through curriculum and instruction and a schedule can we kind of get out of their way and follow them, if you will, in some of their pursuits. Again, making our system more agile to those that we serve, as opposed to suggesting that we've figured it out, and we did so quite a few years ago, and this is the path that you're required to go through. Ubiquitous technology, you will not hear me say that we are going to put a computer or a laptop or a Chromebook in every student's hands. I don't think that's the right thing to do. What I do think the right thing to do is to make sure that our instruction drives the need for technological tools that students need, when they need it, and where they need it, and it's available. So that's part of the ubiquitous nature of this, is to make sure that the instruction drives the need for it and that students can access it when they need it and where they need it. The others, I think, are fairly self-explanatory, but I will end on the collaboration and co-teaching. We have seen an increase opportunity with making sure that we can capture students' understanding in a deeper way, in a more clear way of obtaining the objectives, if sometimes we match teachers together and they co-teach a particular concept or a project or a problem-based lesson. And so part of what we've learned from our partners is that there's the ability to bring teachers together that were separate, and then of course have them be separate through this process. So co-teaching is a part of that process as well. So how do we do it, right? So we've developed 7 principles, and I'm going to go through these fairly rapidly, but the reason why I'm going through this is because I want you to know that as the process continues, and we take a look at different curricula and instructional practices and possible changes to our schedule, we're going to hone in on these 7 principles to say, how is this particular iteration of the curriculum or the instructional approach or the schedule looking with respect to these 7 principles, and is it meeting the standards that we have? As I mentioned, personalization is not anything new for our school district. We've been doing it for many, many years. And this is a conversation for us to, again, take a look at the instructional approaches that allow for that personalization. It's just not enough that we know students in an intimate way, which is critically important, but now it's about using that knowledge to match to their instructional needs. And again, it's about pushing them from a rigor standpoint to make sure that we maximize not only what they can do, but certainly what they can learn. Deep relationships with peers certainly is a part of that. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of getting out of students' way. This last one talks about, and I'll ask it in the form of a question, can our middle schools be so responsive to our kids that we're able to change some of our instructional practices and maybe even some of our schedules to match what they need? That's a tall task for us, but I think it's an important question for us to ask ourselves as we go through this process. Growth mindset. A lot of this work in growth mindset is occurring currently throughout our district. Actually, a lot of this work is occurring in many of our elementary schools. And part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because those students are flowing out of our elementaries and into middle schools where that work has to continue to be extended. And growth mindset is a part of that. Carol Dweck out of Stanford has done a lot of work with this, and we're taking certainly a look at her work. But it really is about teaching kids what grit is about, what perseverance is about. And the reason why that's important is because if you're going to have a growth mindset, it means you're going to push yourself to failure. And when we're talking about rigorous classroom instruction, sometimes we got to push kids to fail early, and sometimes often. And you may think that I'm a little crazy for saying that, but let me ask you this question. What better place would you want your students to fail, if you will, or fall short academically, than in a classroom or in a building around caring adults that are there to make sure that your child is taken care of? There's no better place. And we need to do that. And if I can just be blunt, we're not doing it enough. We need to do it more. And it needs to be across our system in that regard. Social emotional learning, again, I mentioned, part of our work is going to be instructing students on developing these skills in and of themselves. They're reaching an opportunity where they're essentially picking other ways to cope. And that's unacceptable for our students to even contemplate suicide or even contemplate or have access to drugs. I mean, these are skills that our students are needing today, but they'll certainly benefit them into the future as well. All means all. This is one of the things that's going to challenge us more than anything else, is to make sure that we can't just do it for some of our kids, we got to do it for all of them. And we are a very high-performing school district. And I am absolutely thrilled with our achievement. But let's be honest, it's not all of our kids. And until it is all of them, and until we develop a system that can make sure that it can maximize for all of them, we still have work to do. And it's a great conversation for us to be in to ensure that that happens. This is a framework of instruction that we are going to utilize to make sure that we can reach all kids. And I want to explain it a little bit because this is some pretty good research application that we're utilizing in order to do this. Up the vertical axis, you're going to see that's Bloom's taxonomy. So you go from knowledge and recall all the way up to evaluation in terms of your ability to access and utilize and apply the knowledge. Along the horizontal axis is the application model. So number one would be that I can learn something and I learn it in one particular discipline. And I know it. It's math. I've learned a particular concept in math. Two would be applying it in the discipline. So I not only know it, but now I can apply it in a particular situation. Three, I can apply it across disciplines. So I can take that mathematical concept and now I can apply it in science, in scientific evaluation, because there is some play in that where appropriate. The fourth would be I can apply it into a real world setting. We're in a place that does that and replicates it on a daily basis. We need to have those experiences for our kids in middle school, and more so in every one of our high schools. The last one is that I can apply it in an unpredictable situation. So I can take what I know, apply it in a situation that I haven't met before. And that's part of that perseverance and grit that we talked about earlier. So as you see this, every one of these quadrants has a place. There's a time for us to develop skill and for our kids to be exposed to separate courses. There's also a time for them to come together and to be integrated so that I can learn in multiple disciplines and apply them across different disciplines. If we never have that opportunity for kids to be able to do that, where you take two teachers from a separate discipline and you put them together for a particular concept, project, or essential question lesson, then what we're hoping is that our students make that transfer on their own. And I think we have to be more explicit in that as opposed to implicitly suggesting it will occur. Collaboration and communication, the 4 C's of that. You'll see the other 2 come in here in a second. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. Project-based learning is a part of what we'll be doing. Teacher asks an essential question, poses that to students. Students, based upon their requisite skills, go through a process in order to develop skills and understanding and schema in order to solve for either the problem or the project. Again, you see examples of that in this building all the time, and we're starting to see that more and more with some of the instructional changes that we're seeing throughout our building. If you've watched some of the videos on our website, you saw a table being made for a classmate that was in a wheelchair. That was part of this process for that particular middle school. There is a difference between project and problem. They're both applicable. And again, this will be on our website so you can go in and see that. I've talked about ubiquitous technology. Again, it's about the learning. It's about the instruction, not necessarily the technology in and of itself. We're using tools and understandings through Bloom's taxonomy again for a variety of different ways in order to reach each of those levels of understanding. Integration and inquiry, that's that part of can they be separate and appropriate, but can they also come together where it's appropriate as well? And again, to help our students with the application of that knowledge. So those are the principles. So, and I'm almost done. I want to assure you that there has been no recommendation made. The board has taken no action on any change that would be for the 18-19 school year. Nothing. I've showed you what was going to change in 17-18. We are in a discussion phase. We are in a process. We are in looking at these principles and some of our non-negotiables and saying, is there a better way for us to reach all of those students in those aspects? And we're going to continue to have that conversation. I'm going to give you a timeline here in a second that's going to show you some dates when we would be ready, if we're ready, in order to make those recommendations so you full well know what we're doing. I will admit this process has not been perfect, but it has been purposeful to make sure that we can maximize the rigor and relevance of the instruction, the curriculum, and the opportunities that we have for kids. I want to talk about the draft that was presented to the board on April 10th. It was only a draft. It was never meant to be approved. We didn't take a vote on it. The board does not take votes in our workshops. They receive information. You will see next Monday's board meeting. We do not have any recommendations on our board meeting for any action. We have an agenda item during our workshop for middle school communication, and that is about these meetings and the process that we've been going through in terms of updating the board on our progress and process, if you will. But no decisions have been made, and we're not ready, quite honestly, to do it. But where that draft was, and I just want to explain it, was the concept of 3 areas of time for students. So we know that students need the 4 cores. They need math, they need ELA, they need science, and they need social studies, okay? Because those are going to be taught, they're going to be taught to very high, rigorous standards throughout our system of all of our 9 schools. And that's part of advancing that rigor and relevance, is to make sure that we can maximize those opportunities. You will note that we don't have reading there, and currently students take reading. That's part of the integration. When you take a look at what students need to be able to do in terms of their acquisition of knowledge and their understanding of text, it is much more successful if it's in context, if it's in the content. And so we are embedding reading strategies throughout our cores so that, again, our students have an advanced, more rigorous, more relevant understanding of not only the information, but certainly of the reading as well. This is a concept of time, and this is our attempt for our middle schools to be more reactive and more personalized to students. It's still very fuzzy. We don't have a great deal of definition to it. There's been a lot of conversation about it, and that conversation continues. Is it formed up yet? No, it is not. But I do think that we need to find ways in which we can connect more personally to our middle school kids. Remember some of that social and emotional piece. The other is that we don't have a great opportunity in our current schedule to provide interventions for middle school kids. If you note what we did in our high schools, we've created some time around lunch for those high school interventions, and it's been wildly successful, except for some of our freshmen. And we're thinking that the concept could apply here, but it's certainly got to be more structured than it is at the high school, because can we imagine 6th grade students? No. So again, it was still in the works. This is the one that has garnered the most conversation, but again, music is going to be daily. But elective design labs is an important concept for us. Again, kids want to create. We want to have some opportunities for them to create. We also want to have some opportunities to integrate content, okay? And I want to make sure that you understand this. In an elective design lab, it would not be every day, 180 days, where we would combine content areas. If you remember A, B, C, and D, you can't have that D every day. Some days you got to have A. We have to have the acquisition of skill and practice. And then we have to have the opportunity for students to elevate their learning into an evaluation and a synthesis of the information. And then we have to move to B so that they can apply it. Then they're ready to move into a project, a problem, an essential question lesson, so that they can take what they know and they're able to do, and it comes together. So it's not every day, but this is an important concept for us to move forward with. Okay. So again, it's in a process. We're creating a group of teachers and principals to study our ideas, and they're going to go through this proposal as well as others that are coming forward. I just came from Harmony Middle School, where I was talking with our music folks. We're working on a schedule. I see Dan here. I know that I talked to Ed, Blue Valley Southwest. We've got some conversations going about what the possibilities can be. So the conversation still continues, okay? And it was always meant to continue. But again, I'm glad we're having these conversations so that you can understand what we're doing and how we're doing it, and I think the positive effects that will come out of these conversations. These are the 5 areas in which we'll contain the work. We're going to study curriculum. We're going to take a look at instruction, making sure they can be more rigorous and relevant. We're going to look at our assessments to make sure the kids are prepared. Take the ACT, the SAT, to make sure that we can maximize their ability for entrance into college and technical schools and the rest. Professional learning, it's going to take some time for us to understand how this works. Guys, this is not a revolution, it's an evolution of thought and practice. I was making this illustration this afternoon at a middle school. What we required our students to do in the first month of school is certainly not what we're requiring our students to do in the last month of school. They know more, they can do more. And that process of acquisition and acclimation is important. And it'll be the same thing here. But attending to that professional learning of our teachers is an important part of this work. And as I mentioned, technology for it to be used whenever and wherever needed. Okay, so here's the timeline. So December of 2017, this December, would be the opportunity for curricular changes to be presented to our Board of Education. They would first be worked by our Curriculum and Instruction Committee, which is made up of teachers and students and patrons and parents and administrators. They would work it in the fall, and it be presented to our board in December. If that happens, that signifies that there would be a change for the 18-19 school year. Okay? If it doesn't happen, and we'll let you know, certainly, but if it doesn't happen, then there are no changes from a curricular standpoint for the 18-19 school year. Okay? By the way, that was the same process that we went through for the changes that I mentioned at the start of our work. Instruction, we're going to continue to expand our understanding in our work regarding problem-based learning, project-based learning, essential questions, and those sorts of things. Assessments, we're continuing that work. Professional learning, as I mentioned, Dr. Watson's coming in. We've got work that we're doing from an instructional standpoint. Again, this is about rigor and relevance from the instruction and the professional learning standpoint. And then our technology, again, I could have another hour conversation with you about what we're doing in technology, but we're studying that, and we should have it in the hands of some of your students, both at the high school and the middle school, probably second semester, in terms of studying what are the applications and the appropriateness of its use. But again, the instruction has to drive that, not necessarily the technology. Okay? Okay. Are we cutting or eliminating the arts, facts, or PE? No. Next year, music will be daily. It will be by choice. So there is no forced wheel, like we talked about. 17-18, I delineated the changes for you. Again, this will be up on our website. Why we study, hopefully you got that. The EDL and the PDLs. 18-19, today, nothing. If we change something, it would be in our curriculum and instruction committee this fall and presented to the board December of this year.